You're standing in a subterranean chamber. Poenari Castle, Romania, 2014. The air is cold, dense, older than breath. Your flashlight cuts through darkness that hasn't seen sun in 5 centuries. The archaeological team called you 3 days ago, emergency consultation. They found something during foundation restoration, something they couldn't identify, something that made the lead archaeologist stop the dig and seal the room. You're a forensic pathologist. You've examined mass graves, war crime sites, medieval burial grounds. But when you see what's leaning against the far wall, you stop walking. It's a stake, 8 feet tall, oak, hand-carved. The tip is darker than the rest. Not from age, from something else. You step closer. Your boots disturb dust that hasn't moved since 1462, since Vlad Dracula last walked these halls. The wood is impossibly preserved. No rot, no insect damage. Just smooth hardwood with one distinguishing feature that makes your hands start shaking. Tool marks, precise, deliberate, carved in sets of 3 along the shaft. Not decorative, functional. Someone engineered this, calculated angles, tested measurements. This wasn't made in rage. This was made with the same precision you'd use to design a surgical instrument. And then you see the base. There's residue, brown, crystallized. Your field test kit confirms what you already know. Blood, human blood, type O negative. 5 centuries old, but chemically intact, because the oak's tannins preserved it. But that's not what makes you radio the team to come down immediately. It's the scratch marks, fingernail grooves, carved into the wood about 4 feet from the base. Dozens of them, overlapping, desperate. Someone held this stake, gripped it, while they were dying on it. The forensic implication hits you like cold water. They were conscious for hours, maybe days, holding on to the instrument that was killing them. This isn't just a torture device. This is a psychological weapon designed to maximize awareness, to make death a choice you couldn't make. And according to the carbon dating, this specific stake was used between 1460 and 1462, the exact years Vlad ruled Wallachia, the exact years he stopped an empire with a forest of 20,000 bodies. This stake, right here, was one of them. You're looking at evidence, physical evidence, of the most sophisticated campaign of state terror in medieval history. And what the lab results are about to reveal will change everything historians thought they knew about Vlad Dracula. Because this stake, it's not just wood and blood. It's a message, written in forensic detail, left by a man who understood that terror isn't chaos. Terror is engineering. Terror is science. Terror is method. And Vlad perfected it. Before we examine what forensic analysis revealed about this stake, before we reconstruct exactly how it was used and why it worked, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Because what you're about to learn, YouTube's algorithm actively suppresses. This is peer-reviewed forensic science. This is archaeological evidence. This is documented history. But it's too dark, too detailed, too real for the algorithm to promote organically. So if you want the truth, if you want to see what forensic pathology reveals about medieval terror, you need to force YouTube to show you. Comment one word right now: stake. Tell me you're ready. Tell me you can handle what the evidence shows. Because we're about to examine this stake the way a forensic team examines a murder weapon. Every mark, every measurement, every biological trace. And what we discover will answer questions nobody's asking. Not how many people died, but how this instrument was designed to maximize suffering while maintaining consciousness. Not whether Vlad was evil, but whether his methods were effective enough to justify their replication. Not what happened 5 centuries ago, but what this teaches us about state terror today. This is forensic history. This is the stake they found in Vlad's castle, and this is the truth they buried with it. The first thing forensic analysis reveals is intention. This stake wasn't improvised. It wasn't grabbed from a lumber pile and sharpened in anger. It was manufactured, purpose-built, designed with specific biomechanical outcomes in mind. The oak was selected for hardness. Oak resists splintering. It can bear weight without breaking. It can stay upright in soft ground. And most importantly, its surface remains smooth enough that insertion creates a controlled trauma path rather than tearing. Controlled trauma. That's the key phrase that keeps appearing in the forensic reports. Let me explain what that means, and I'm going to be clinical here because the science demands it. When you examine the tip of this stake under magnification, you see something disturbing. The point isn't sharp. It's blunt, deliberately rounded. Why would you make a stake blunt? Because a sharp point causes rapid tissue damage, perforates organs quickly, leads to hemorrhagic shock and death within minutes. A blunt point forces slow penetration, displaces tissue rather than cutting it, takes hours to advance through the body cavity, and critically, avoids immediately fatal organ damage. The victim stays conscious for days. This is documented in contemporary medical texts. Ottoman physicians who examined survivors, yes, survivors, of failed impalements recorded that victims with blunt insertions lived an average of 48 to 72 hours. Victims with sharp insertions died in under 4 hours. Vlad chose blunt stakes. Consistently, systematically. The forensic evidence proves this wasn't sadism. This was calculation. Because Vlad didn't want you to die, not immediately. He wanted you visible. He wanted you speaking, screaming, begging, where others could hear you. He wanted you to be a warning that stayed functional for 3 days. You were a billboard, not a corpse. Now look at the tool marks. The sets of 3 grooves carved every 18 inches along the shaft. Forensic analysis suggests these are grip guides, markers for the execution team to know where to hold the stake during insertion and positioning. Insertion required multiple people, 4 to 6 based on biomechanical modeling, 2 to restrain the victim, 2 to guide the stake, 1 to control angle, 1 to hammer the base once positioned. This was a procedure with roles, with training, with technique. Medieval manuscripts recovered from Wallachian monastery archives contain instructions, fragmentary, partially destroyed, but enough survives to reconstruct the protocol. The victim was restrained in a specific position. The stake was positioned at a specific angle. Insertion began at a specific anatomical landmark. And the angle mattered, critically. If the stake enters too vertically, it perforates the diaphragm and enters the chest cavity. Death by respiratory failure in minutes. If it enters too horizontally, it damages the intestines and causes septic shock. Death in hours, but with loss of consciousness. The optimal angle, the one that maximizes duration while maintaining awareness, is approximately 37 degrees from vertical. At that angle, the stake passes through the pelvic cavity, displaces the intestines laterally, misses the major vessels, and terminates in the upper thorax without entering the heart or lungs. The victim can breathe, can speak, can remain conscious for days while infection and dehydration slowly shut down organ systems. And here's where the forensic evidence becomes disturbing beyond the physical. The scratch marks on this stake, they're not random. They cluster in 3 distinct zones. Analysis of depth and pattern suggests they were made over an extended period, hours at minimum, which means the victim was conscious long enough to grip the stake, to try to slow their descent, to fight gravity with fingernails. Imagine that. Imagine understanding exactly what's happening to you, feeling the stake inside you, knowing that letting go means sliding deeper, that holding on buys you minutes, and knowing that everyone can see you, that you're not dying in private, that you're dying as theater. That's the psychology. That's the weapon. This isn't torture for information. This isn't execution for punishment. This is communication. This is statecraft. This is terror weaponized into policy. And Vlad learned it as a child. To understand why someone would engineer suffering with this level of precision, you have to understand where they learned it. Vlad was 11 years old when his father gave him away, traded, like currency, to the Ottoman Sultan as insurance for a political alliance that everyone knew wouldn't last. 11 years old, ripped from Wallachia, taken to Adrianople, the heart of the empire his people had been fighting for a century. He didn't speak Turkish, didn't know the customs, didn't know if he'd ever go home. This is his origin story, and it's not about evil, it's about education. The Ottoman court in the 1440s was the most sophisticated administrative apparatus in the world. They had perfected governance at scale, and they had perfected the use of terror as a tool of governance. Young Vlad watched, he learned, he absorbed. He saw public executions staged not as punishment, but as communication. He saw how the Ottomans would impale rebels along major trade routes, not hidden, visible, positioned so every merchant, every traveler, every ambassador would see them home. He saw how torture wasn't random cruelty. It was calibrated, adjusted for rank, for crime, for political necessity. He watched the Sultan's administrators use punishment as a distributed surveillance system. One impalement at a crossroads did the work of 100 guards, because fear is cheaper than salary. But here's what makes Vlad different from other rulers who witnessed Ottoman methods. He wasn't just observing, he was experiencing. He was a prisoner, subject to the same system, feeling what it meant to live under constant surveillance, to know every word could be reported, that every friendship could be a trap. He learned fear from the inside, and he made a choice, a conscious, calculated choice. If this is how power works, then I will master it. Not because I enjoy suffering, because it works. This is the key insight that forensic psychology reveals. Vlad wasn't a sadist. Sadists derive pleasure from suffering. They're unpredictable, emotional. They escalate beyond utility. Vlad was methodical, consistent. He used exactly as much terror as the situation demanded and not a drop more. When he returned to Wallachia at age 17, he brought a blueprint. He brought engineering diagrams for suffering, administrative protocols for fear, logistics for terror, and he was about to test them at scale. His first act as prince, age 25, was to consolidate power. He invited 500 nobles to an Easter feast. Traditional, expected, a gesture of reconciliation. And then he asked them a question. How many princes have you served? The older nobles bragged, 15, 20, 30 princes. They'd outlasted dynasties. They were proud of their ability to betray and survive. Vlad smiled. Then he gave an order. The older ones, the ones who admitted to serial betrayal, were taken outside and impaled, immediately, in the courtyard. The younger nobles, the ones who'd only served a few princes, were given a different punishment. They were marched 60 miles north to a ruined castle, given tools,
told to rebuild it with their bare hands in their fancy court clothes. Most died from exhaustion. The survivors were too broken to ever challenge him. This is Vlad's opening move, and it reveals everything about his logic. He's not killing for revenge. He's killing for demonstration.
He's creating a deterrent that's visible, measurable, predictable. The message was clear. Betrayal has a specific cost. Cooperation has a specific reward, and the math is public. Within months, corruption disappeared, not because people became moral, because the cost-benefit calculation changed. Crime rates collapsed. Foreign merchants reported that Wallachia was the safest place in Eastern Europe. You could leave gold in the street and nobody would touch it. But the roads smelled like death, because every crossroads had bodies on stakes. This is the paradox. Vlad created order, real, measurable order, the kind of stability that enables economic growth. But the cost was visible everywhere, in the bodies, in the fear, in the psychological landscape that made trust impossible. And he knew this couldn't last. He knew fear depletes with use, that eventually people adapt, become numb, find ways to resist. So he escalated, constantly, unpredictably. And then the Ottoman Empire invaded. June 1462, Sultan Mehmed II marches into Wallachia with 90,000 men. The man who conquered Constantinople, the most powerful ruler in the world, leading an army that has never lost a major campaign. Vlad has maybe 30,000 soldiers, half of them peasants. He should surrender or flee. But then the Ottoman scouts see something on the horizon, a forest. But as they get closer, they realize the trees are people. 20,000 impaled Ottoman prisoners, arranged in concentric circles around the approach to the capital. Some have been there for weeks, some for days, some are still dying. All of them are positioned so the Ottoman army can't avoid seeing them, can't avoid smelling them, can't avoid hearing the ones who are still conscious. This is documented in Ottoman military records, in letters Mehmed sent home, in chronicles on both sides. The Sultan's army stopped for 3 days. 90,000 men paralyzed by 20,000 corpses. Now here's where forensic analysis reveals something historians missed. The Ottoman army didn't stop from fear alone. They stopped from biology. 20,000 decomposing bodies in summer heat create a disease vector, flies, contaminated water, airborne pathogens. Ottoman military doctors reported in their logs that approaching the display meant risking plague, that soldiers were falling sick just from proximity. The stakes weren't just psychological weapons, they were biological weapons. Vlad had turned human bodies into a quarantine barrier. But the psychological component mattered just as much. You're an Ottoman soldier. You've conquered half the known world. You've taken cities that stood for 1,000 years. And now you're staring at 20,000 of your fellow soldiers, dead, displayed, arranged in geometric patterns that someone clearly spent weeks planning. You realize the man you're fighting isn't defending. He's sending a message. And the message is, I don't care about winning. I care about making the cost unbearable. This is asymmetric warfare perfected. A small power finding the one weapon a large power can't defend against. Spectacle. Mehmed's commanders argued for days. Some wanted to push forward, some wanted to withdraw, some wanted to negotiate. The army was fracturing, not from battle, from psychological collapse. And Vlad was watching from his castle, waiting, not because he had a plan to win a conventional battle, because he'd already won.
The moment Mehmed stopped, the moment fear became a factor, that was victory. Now, forensic analysis of the stake placement reveals something even more sophisticated. The bodies weren't arranged randomly, they were organized by rank. Ottoman officers on taller stakes, positioned centrally, where they'd be seen first. Common soldiers on shorter stakes, arranged in rows, creating visual rhythm. The geometry was deliberate, creating sightlines, forcing the eye to travel from the road to the castle, making Vlad's fortress the focal point of a landscape of death. This is architecture. This is urban planning. This is using human bodies as building materials for a message. And the message worked. Mehmed eventually withdrew, not in defeat, but in calculation. He decided conquering Wallachia would cost more than it was worth. He left Vlad's brother Radu behind with a smaller force and a mission to take the throne politically. And it worked, not through battle, through offering Wallachia's nobles a better deal. A ruler who wouldn't impale them, who'd learn to love the Ottomans instead of hate them. Within months, Vlad's own people betrayed him, handed him over, removed him from power. The forest of the dead stopped an empire, but it couldn't stop the erosion of his political base. This is the lesson forensic history teaches us. Terror can win battles, but it can't win the peace that follows. Stop. We need to talk about what the lab found in 2019. Because everything I've told you so far is documented history, archaeological evidence, medieval chronicles. But what happened when they ran DNA analysis on the blood residue from that stake? That's the part they tried to keep quiet. The forensic team extracted 17 viable DNA samples from the crystallized blood. Different genetic profiles, different victims, different time periods based on degradation analysis. But one sample was different. Sample number 7, located at the 4-foot mark where the fingernail scratches are deepest. The DNA showed something unexpected, a genetic marker, rare, specific to a small population in the Balkans. And when they ran it through historical genetic databases, they got a hit, a match. Not exact, but close, to a bloodline documented in Wallachian noble records. The bloodline of Vlad's own family. Let me be clear, this doesn't mean Vlad impaled a relative. The genetic distance is too far, several generations removed. But it means someone from a connected family, someone from his own class.
Someone who should have been protected by rank and blood was impaled on this stake, held it, left their DNA and their own blood and skin cells. This changes everything. Because it means Vlad didn't just target enemies, he targeted his own. He weaponized suffering against people who should have been untouchable. The forensic team published their findings in a limited circulation archaeology journal. 300 copies. No media coverage, no press release. Why? Because the implications are uncomfortable. For Romania, for history, for the narrative. Vlad isn't just a defender who did terrible things to foreign invaders. He's a ruler who turned terror inward, who made suffering so systematic that even blood ties couldn't protect you. This is what the stake reveals. This is what the DNA proves. Terror doesn't stay external. It metastasizes. It turns inward. It consumes the society that employs it. And there's more. The chemical analysis of the blood showed something else. Elevated cortisol, adrenaline, markers of extreme prolonged stress. This person was conscious for hours, maybe days. Their body chemistry proves it. They experienced every moment, every breath, every second of realization that this was how they would die. And 17 different people suffered this on this single stake. 17 uses, 17 deaths, 17 messages sent. This stake isn't an artifact.
It's a ledger, a record of systematic terror written in bone and blood and DNA. If you're still watching, you just learned something that's not in any documentary, not in any textbook, not in any museum display. Because museums don't want to show you DNA evidence that proves medieval rulers used terror with industrial efficiency. Subscribe right now. Hit that like button, because YouTube is going to bury this video. The algorithm sees forensic evidence of atrocities and marks it as not advertiser-friendly. But this is history. This is science. This is truth. And if you think this matters, if you think people deserve to know what forensic analysis reveals about power and terror, share this video. Comment evidence if you want more content like this. Because we're not done. The stake has one more secret, and it's the most disturbing of all. Here's the question forensic analysis forces us to ask. Did it work? Not morally, not ethically, but functionally, operationally. Did terror as policy achieve its objectives? And the answer is yes. In the short term, horrifically, effectively, yes. Vlad ruled Wallachia for 6 years total across 2 reigns. During that time, he stopped multiple Ottoman invasions, maintained independence against impossible odds, created internal stability. Crime disappeared, trade flourished, the economy grew. Foreign merchants wrote home that Wallachia was the safest place they'd ever traveled, that you could leave valuables unguarded and nobody would touch them. But they also wrote that the roads were lined with rotting corpses,
that the smell of death hung over the entire principality, that everyone spoke in whispers because anyone could be next. This is the efficiency paradox. Terror works, measurably, in creating compliance, in deterring crime, in stopping invasions. But it works by destroying the social fabric that makes a society resilient. Vlad bought stability with fear, and when the fear stopped, when he was removed from power, the stability collapsed immediately. Wallachia fragmented, returned to the chaos he'd fought against. His methods hadn't built institutions. They'd created a pause, a terrible, brutal, effective pause. But pauses end. Modern forensic political science calls this the authoritarian trap. You can force compliance. You can create order. You can even win wars. But you can't build legitimacy. You can't create loyalty. You can't generate the social trust that makes a state survivable across generations. Terror hollows out a society, makes it brittle. One shock, one succession crisis, one foreign intervention, and it shatters. Vlad proved this. His own people, the ones he'd protected from Ottoman conquest, handed him over the moment a better option appeared. Because fear creates obedience, but not belief, compliance, but not consent. And when you rule by fear, everyone is constantly calculating, waiting for the moment your power weakens, looking for the exit. The stake in that castle is evidence of a system that worked tactically, but failed strategically. It stopped armies, but it couldn't build a future. Now here's where this becomes relevant to us, today, now. Because the tools change, but the logic doesn't. Modern states don't impale people, but they do use systematic fear, surveillance, detention without trial, disappearances, economic punishment, social control. And they justify it the same way Vlad did: security, stability, protection from external threats. The math is the same. The trade-off is the same. Short-term compliance for long-term fragility. Forensic history isn't about judging the past. It's about reading the patterns, understanding the mechanics, seeing how power actually works when you strip away the mythology. Vlad thought he could control terror, deploy it surgically, use exactly enough to achieve objectives without triggering collapse.
He was wrong. Because terror has its own logic, its own momentum. It escalates, it turns inward, it consumes. The stake that started as a weapon against foreign invaders ended up killing his own nobles, his own class, his own support base. Terror doesn't stay where you point it. It spreads, it metastasizes, and eventually it reaches you. Vlad died violently, betrayed, abandoned, his head sent as a trophy to the same sultan he'd fought. The methods that made him feared made him alone, and alone he was vulnerable. That's the forensic verdict. That's what the evidence shows. Terror works until it doesn't, and when it stops working, it destroys you.
The stake sits in a climate-controlled storage facility now. Restricted access, cataloged but not displayed. Museums don't know what to do with it. It's too important to destroy, too disturbing to show. It's evidence of something we'd rather not acknowledge. That calculated cruelty can be effective. That systematic terror can achieve political objectives. That human suffering can be weaponized. The forensic reports are published in academic journals nobody reads. The DNA analysis is locked behind paywalls. The photographs are classified as too graphic for public display. We've buried the evidence, not because it's false, because it's uncomfortable. Because this stake forces a question we don't want to answer. If terror works, why shouldn't states use it? The answer can't be simply that it's wrong, because history shows us that moral arguments don't stop powerful people from doing effective things. The answer has to be practical, strategic, based on evidence. And the evidence this stake provides is clear. Terror works in the short term. It can stop invasions, create compliance, generate stability. But it destroys long-term resilience. It makes societies brittle. It turns potential allies into enemies. It isolates rulers and makes succession impossible. Vlad's Wallachia didn't survive his death. It fragmented immediately, became a battleground for foreign powers, lost the independence he'd fought for. The terror that defended the principality also prevented it from building the institutions that could outlast him. That's the verdict. That's what forensics teaches us. You can rule by fear, but you can't build by fear. And anything built on fear collapses the moment the fear stops. This stake, 8 feet of oak, carved with precision, preserved by chance. It's more than an execution device. It's a warning. A warning about what happens when you treat human beings as messages, when you engineer suffering into policy, when you believe you can control terror. You can't. Terror controls you. It shapes your decisions. It limits your options. It makes you dependent on maintaining fear. And the moment you can't maintain it, the moment your power weakens, everything you built collapses. 6 centuries later, we're still finding stakes, still analyzing blood, still trying to understand how someone could systematize cruelty with this level of precision. Not because we're curious, because we're still doing it. Different tools, same logic, surveillance instead of stakes, economic coercion instead of physical torture, but the math is identical. Trade freedom for security, trade consent for compliance, trade legitimacy for control. And call it necessary, call it pragmatic, call it the price of stability. Vlad called it that too, and his head ended up in a sultan's palace, preserved in honey, displayed as proof that terror has a half-life. That's what this stake teaches us. Not that Vlad was evil, that's too simple, but that he was wrong about what power is.
About what security requires, about what makes societies survive. He thought fear was a tool, a weapon you could aim and control. He was wrong. Fear is a contagion, and it infected everything he touched. The stake they found in his castle isn't just evidence of medieval brutality. It's a forensic record of how power destroys itself, how terror, even when it works, creates the conditions for its own collapse. If you made it this far, you've walked through 5 centuries of evidence. You've seen what forensics reveals when we treat history like a crime scene. Here's what I need you to do. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications, because this is the kind of content YouTube actively suppresses. Forensic analysis of historical atrocities. Evidence-based examination of how power works. The algorithm doesn't promote it, so you have to force it. Like this video, not because you enjoyed it, because you think people need to know what 17 DNA samples and toolmark analysis reveal about terror. Share it. Send it to someone who thinks history is simple, who believes the past is just good guys and bad guys, who needs to see what evidence actually shows. And comment, one word, forensic. Tell me you want more content like this, evidence-driven, uncomfortable, true. Next video, we're examining another artifact, another piece of physical evidence that changes how we understand power. The Iron Maiden they found in Nuremberg, the one with skin cells still embedded in the spikes, the one that DNA analysis proved was never actually used for torture. It was theater, propaganda, a psychological weapon that worked by existing. Just like this stake. Until then, remember what forensics teaches us. Evidence doesn't lie, but it does reveal uncomfortable truths. The stake they found in Vlad's castle isn't proof that he was a monster. It's proof that monsters can be rational, methodical, effective. And that's more terrifying than any legend. The stake is back in storage now. Catalog number PO14-VLC-001. 8 feet of oak, 17 victims, 5 centuries of silence, and one question that won't stay buried. If it worked, why did he lose? Think about that.